Hi, good morning. As Emma said, the issues we talked about were the international and jurisdictional considerations that are part of the due diligence and the process you go through when engaging and embracing cloud technologies. So we kind of did a round table. We went around and asked people where they were at, and we talked about the experience we've had doing projects in this space and what our current customers have done when encountering these issues. And so it was a little bit of us talking about what we found and a little bit of the people around our table talking about the issues that they're faced with. First of these that came up was actually interaction or integration and interoperability between legacy systems. So if you're engaging the cloud and you're going through these issues of jurisdiction and internationalization, where's your data going to reside? You know, what's the ownership and what's the route out of that provider? What does the SLA tell you about all of those things? And what do the compliance standards of that vendor give you in terms of assurance of their abilities to manage your data against things like the Data Protection Act and so forth, but also how do we manage the integration back to the data that we're working with on-prem? And the reason I think that came up is that for many of our current clients and for some of the guys around our table, this isn't a black and white either or. This is hybrid. This is, let's take advantage of the cloud where it's right for us to do so. And if we're going to do that, and if that's feasible for us, we need to be able to connect the data that we safely put in the cloud with the data that we're still working with on-premise. And in order to do that, we need to be working with the right sort of cloud providers, and we need to have technology that allows us to manage coexistence. So we had conversations around how you do that with email, conversations around how you do that with compute horsepower on a sort of utility basis, so that you can connect the investments in IT that you've already made with the bits of the cloud that you choose to use in a complementary fashion to your existing on-premise estate. We then got on to information storage. Once you decide to engage cloud computing, you're essentially outsourcing and getting a third party to manage aspects of the critical data that is important to you as an organization. So what does that mean for you? What do you need to consider? The quick fire things that came out of that, the questions and some of the issues concerned safe harbor. Where's the data center? If we're operating under the EU and the UK Data Protection Act, where's the data center of the cloud provider that we're working with? Does that give us a certainty and assurance that our data is being managed in a compliant way with that legislation? Other aspects of compliance also came up in that conversation, and it's interesting that this isn't necessarily all about the cloud proving itself that it is as compliant as your on-premise systems. We've been doing these things for quite a long time, and over the course of the last sort of 18 months, the time that the cloud circle's been up and running, we've seen the debate move on, even to the point that the legal industry has actually come and presented and said, cloud providers, the public cloud providers, are actually part of the answer to help you improve and achieve things like information management best practice through ISO 27001. So not only can it come up to the minimum standards that you're looking to with the systems that you're running on-premise yourselves, it can actually also accelerate your ability as an organization to become compliant with these types of standards, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you coming here today saw the cloud or thought of the cloud that way, but actually cloud computing, because of the investments that all of the providers represented in the room here are making, they probably out of the box will give you some capabilities around ISO 27001 and others. So that was interesting. Corporate policies. We had a great example from one of the people around our table of a project that they'd done with one of the cloud vendors, where they had been through all sorts of due diligence internally. They had wrestled with that, if I can put it that way. It wasn't straightforward. It took some time. There were obstacles to overcome. But once they did that and they decided to put the data in the cloud, they came up with a transparency and a sort of compliance policy based on informed consent. So what they were doing when they were putting people's data in the cloud is that they were making those people aware of that and giving them a link to the SLAs of the cloud provider they were working with so that they could see that, they could judge that for themselves, they could be aware of that, and if they wanted to, they could opt out of that. So that was quite an interesting example from around our table of how some people are dealing with these issues and being upfront and open and clear about it. The US, our friend, the US Patriot Act came up. And that might have come up in some of the other tables. Some of the rest of you may have been talking about this concept that if you outsource your data to a US company, regardless of where the data center is located, then you have this question of the US Patriot Act and the ability of the US government to go to Microsoft, Google, whoever it may be, and request that data. And I think what we had was a sort of a stand back, sort of think about that and question about, well, why would they? Under what circumstances would some of us as businesses fall under the spotlight and have that sort of question asked of us? And how different actually is that likely to be where we're working with cloud technologies, public or hosting providers? In other words, is it unique to the cloud, or is it just another part of the legal framework and fabric that we need to understand in doing international global business? Because wherever you're doing business, there are local and regional legal aspects that need to be taken into account, and this is really no different. I think the other point about it is that right now there is no cloud security standard. So regardless of who you've been talking to, we can't give you one single answer, one sort of consistent industry standard checkbox that says this is where we're at right now. The good news is that I think the industry vendors represented here today are working collaboratively on a peer-to-peer basis to achieve that, but we're not there right now. So that is just a reality of where we are at the moment. And I think from our point of view as a business, and certainly working with our customers, our view is that you kind of need to use the cloud where it's right to do so. Use the cloud where it makes sense to do so, and not some sort of hard line in the sand where you're either using the cloud or you're not. For us, it's pragmatic. It's not dogma. It's not some sort of hard break with the past. It's just an extension of choice. You've got more compute options that could be quite simple in what they represent to your organization, or they might fundamentally change your business model. But it is really, at the end of the day, an extension of choice. So the fact that we don't have this today perhaps means you have to look at it that way. But actually, I think that's quite a common sense approach to it. And for most businesses, they want pragmatic choice and, yes, the opportunity to save money, but without having to necessarily throw away or write down investments that you've already made. Last one there, what's this? The initial project that you do, what have you written here, Ken?
The initial cloud projects are likely to steer clear of these international jurisdiction issues because they haven't really been fully assessed and
right.
resolved in most organisations.
So this was the one that was still being scribbled as I was getting up to speak to you, so forgive me. So yeah, I mean, I think what we're saying is that a lot of people still are at an investigative stage, a dip the toe in the water stage. And what that means is that your first experience of cloud might give you an idea and an insight into the capabilities and the benefits of the technologies without necessarily, shall we say, highlighting to you all of these issues. It may be that you can make a start with cloud without having to resolve all of this for the entire business in order to make a start with some of it. So I think that kind of wraps up what we discussed. So bits of our experience, bits of experience from people around the table, some great examples of how people are using these things and doing pragmatic things to be open about what they're doing. And I hope that's been of interest. Thanks, Emma.